Today I want to show you how to color correct and color grade a series of shots, specifically if you've used a different camera or different lenses to get these different shots. I think this is particularly helpful for the budget filmmaker. A lot of times we have an A cam and a B cam, and those cameras are going to be different lenses on these cameras. You might be shooting an interview with two different angles, and your main angle is a really nice high quality camera with a high quality lens, and your secondary angle is a lower quality camera and maybe not as nice of a lens. So the challenge becomes, how can we take these 2 or 3 different cameras with different lenses and make them look the same? Different brands of cameras affect skin tone differently. So how can we make sure that all the shots in our sequence look like they belong together? They look like they're filmed from the same camera, just with different angles. So that's what I've done today. I filmed a short sequence using 3 different cameras. I've got my iPhone, my Sony A7iii, and my Blackmagic Pocket 4K shooting RAW. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna color correct and then color grade all these clips. And hopefully by the end, all the different shots, the different camera angles will all look like maybe that they're shot from the same camera, but at the very least, they'll all look like they belong together in this film sequence. So let's jump into DaVinci Resolve and see if we can get these 3 different cameras to match each other and look like they belong together in this sequence. And stick around to the end of the video, and I'm going to give you a free LUT that's gonna help make your color grading process a little bit easier. So first I wanna show you what each of the different cameras looks like. So I shot this one with the iPhone. I've got this one with the Sony A7iii, and it's not shot in a log format, but it is shot in a very flat profile. And then of course, the Blackmagic, this is RAW. And so as you can see with these 3 different clips, the starting points are very different on them. You've got a highly saturated, highly contrast shot from the iPhone, a little bit flatter on both saturation and contrast on the Sony, and quite a bit flatter for the RAW footage. But by the end of this, we should have all these clips looking fairly similar, at least like they belong together in the sequence. Now, there's going to be a quality difference, of course, between the iPhone and the Blackmagic. You're not going to get the same quality of footage. Even though they're both shot in 4K, 4K does not mean the same quality on different cameras. So you're going to have a quality difference, but look past the quality difference and look into how can we make these cameras match each other with color and style and things like that. So the first thing that I like to do when I'm filming with one camera or multiple cameras especially, is I like to get out my color checker. And what this is going to do is going to help you set not just the white balance, but the color balance on all the different colors in the spectrum. Now you can just use a white balance. If you have a white balance card is great, or if you just have maybe a white piece of paper that you can hold up, that's going to, and film it, that's going to, in post, allow you to come in and set the white balance for the scene. Sometimes you can have something in the scene that is white, but sometimes white gets a little bit overblown, and sometimes what looks white in the scene isn't true white. Sometimes it has a blue tint or an orange tint to it. Like both of these are white, but they have slightly different tints to them, the cabinets and the light switch. So it's nice to have something that is going to be pure white. But if you get a chance to get a color checker, I think that's a good advantage for you, because each camera is going to, not just the white balance, but particularly the skin tones, each camera is going to see skin tones differently in their color profile. So particularly with the Sony, they are sort of notorious for having skin tones that are a little bit on the green side. And so a lot of times you have to push your color balance towards magenta. But if you're doing it only with the white balance, you're moving the whites towards magenta while you're also getting the skin tones where they need to be. So it's really helpful to have something like the color checker that's going to give you not just your white balance, but going to give you skin tones and all these other colors in between. It's really going to help you when you're dealing with multiple cameras. It's going to help you get a good starting point. Now, of course, getting your white balance as close as possible in camera is also very important. For RAW, it doesn't matter. But for like the iPhone and the Sony shot, it's really important to get your white balance as close as possible to start with. So the first thing that you want to do is not use auto white balance, because if the light shifts or something changes in the scene, your white balance can be moving during the shot, which is just terrible and makes the footage almost useless. So the best thing to do is, like with the Sony, not to use auto white balance, but to use a custom white balance, and always have some white piece of paper or a white card with you. So you can set your custom white balance in camera. It's going to give you your best starting point. But then I would also still recommend getting something like the color checker so that in post you can adjust all the colors, not just the white balance. And you'll see how that works as we dive into the color page here. So I want to start with, let's start with the iPhone shot. And every program is going to be a little different, but in DaVinci Resolve, it has a color chart here in the color editing page. You can open up your color chart and you just drag the four corners down to the four corners of your color checker. Make sure that it's all lined up really well. If you happen to have like shadows, because we're from where the light's coming from, just try to make sure that this square, like this blue square, is deep inside the blue where it's not hitting shadows, or that could affect your color editing a little bit. So you can come over to the color match, and what you'll see is a color checker that looks just like the one that I have. Now mine is the classic, not the legacy. So I turn it on classic, and essentially what's going to happen is your computer's going to see each color inside these squares, not just the white balance, but every color, and it's going to match it with all the colors here. And so I leave it on all the default settings here because it's always worked for me, and then I just hit match. And so the first thing that you can see with this is you might say, well, that didn't make it look better, that made it look worse. So here's with the color checker off, okay? Here's with it on. And you might say, okay, this actually looks like it pushed everything towards sort of the orange and green look to it, okay? And that might be true. Maybe it does look, quote, worse to start with. But what you're looking for here is not, this is not the color grading. Color grading, you're going to get to make this image look exactly how you want it to. For color correction, you need it to look correct. And, you know, the iPhone was oversaturated. And the good thing is when we use this color checker on each of the camera angles, it doesn't matter whether it makes it look better or worse, they're all going to look the same. And that's what we're going for. So I'm going to do the same thing for the Sony. Okay, get those lined up well. Change this to the classic and match the colors. And you got the same thing here. So this is before and this is after. Now if we look at this and we look at the iPhone shot and the Sony shot, now the colors are very, very similar. Now we still have a little bit issues with contrast and things like that, but we will fix those next. Right now we're just worried about, are our colors matched between the shots? So let's look at the Black Magic. Okay, same thing here. So same thing. You know, obviously we've got some issues with contrast. These three shots have a very different contrast, but now the skin tone, the whites, everything is going to be, for the most part, exactly the same. By the end of this, we are going to see that they match up. But the important thing is, now all three of these clips, the color balance is the same on all of them. So the next thing we're going to do is work on the contrast and get those looking the same for each of the clips. So to get the contrast matching between these three clips, we're going to be using the waveform, which is over on the bottom right on DaVinci Resolve. And also we're just going to be using our eyes to make sure that things look the same between the three shots. So I like to use the curves for this. And so what I'm looking for on all three of the shots, I want the blacks to be very close to zero without hitting zero. And I want the highs, if you have a light source, like here accidentally I've got my light showing, or if you had a window or something like that, if you have an actual light source, you would want the brightest part of the image to be just under this 1023. We just don't want any clipping in the highs or the lows. When information starts hitting 0 or when it starts clipping out of the top, you lose all of that information. So we're gonna use the curves bar to fix that. First, I'm going to create a new layer mode here. And I'm gonna use the curves. Let's look at the blacks first. The blacks are already touching the 0. So if I pull that down, more information starts touching 0. So what I'm gonna do the opposite. I'm gonna take the bottom left corner of the curves line and pull it up until the blacks are just sitting above the 0. Now in the image, the blacks still look black. They might be slightly more faded, but I just don't want them touching the 0 yet. In the color grading, you can really do whatever you want. But for the color correcting portion of this, I want it not quite touching the 0. So I'm also going to pull down the highs because the cabinets look a little bright. The face looks a little brighter than what I know that I will want from the other shots. And so, you know, you're not looking for a specific number here. Obviously, we don't want anything peaking overexposed in the color correcting portion of this. You can always brighten things up in color grading. Remember that. You can always crush the blacks, you know, blow out some windows or light source in the color grading portion. But we're talking about the color correcting part. So I don't want anything peaking. And I just want to see that, you know, between the 3 shots, the blacks aren't hitting 0 and the skin tones and things that are white in the image look about the same. So I'm going to pull that back a little bit and give myself some room for the other shots. So let's skip forward to the Sony shot. And as you can see here, the blacks are very close to the 0. So I might back them off just a hair, but I think I'm just gonna leave them basically where they are. And for the highs as well, I think I would like to pull them down just a little bit. So let's flip back and forth between these two. They're pretty close. I think that you can come in and tweak things a little bit more, but I think for the most part, they're fairly close. I think that the iPhone now is a little bit lower saturation than the Sony. And so I'm just going to take the Sony and turn its saturation down just a little bit. Okay, so those 2 clips are matching up. So let's look at the black magic now. Now the blacks are very far from the bottom. So we've got plenty of room here to pull the blacks down till they are close to the bottom, not touching, but close. And then the same thing for the highs. Let's drag those up and not too far, because again, we want everything to match. And so now what I'm doing is I'm flipping back and forth between the 3 camera angles. And I just want to see that they all look similar. I'm gonna do the same to the black magic, drop the saturation down to 45. Okay, one more thing that I'm seeing. I think that the iPhone needs a little bit of warmth, not much, and a little bit of tint pushed towards the magenta. I might be wrong there, but let's turn just that color correction on and off. I think this one with the adjustments that I just added, I think it brings it a little bit closer to these other 2. And I think I'm gonna go ahead and drop this one to 40. Okay, so once you get these 3 clips looking as close as you can, making them look possibly like they belong to the same camera, just with different focal lengths. Now we need to copy and paste these settings to each of the iPhone clips for this one, the Sony and the Blackmagic. So let's start with the iPhone. I'm gonna right click and hit grab still. That's going to, in our gallery, that's going to save this color grade or color correction. So here's the Sony. I'm gonna grab it, and here is the Blackmagic. So now I've got the 3 color corrections, and I'm going to be able to add them to all the other clips that were shot with each of the individual cameras. So back on my main editing page, I've actually already set up the sequence here with each of the different shots. I've got the iPhone on one layer, I've got the Sony on the next, and the Blackmagic on the top. So what I'm going to do first is just disable the Blackmagic and the Sony. So now all I'm going to be able to see are the different iPhone shots. And so I'll go in here, go back to my color page, select I'll right click on the iPhone color correction and hit apply grade. And I'm going to do that for both of the iPhone clips. So now every iPhone clip in the sequence has the same color correction to it. And the reason I disable these is just so I don't accidentally put the wrong color grade on the wrong video. You can obviously just do this by looking at it. So I will disable the iPhone track and enable the Sony layer. And one thing you can do is you can go back to your color page. If you open up the clips tab, it will show all the clips here on the bottom. So I can click the first Sony clip in the sequence, hold shift and click the last one. It'll highlight all three of them. And then I can click on the Sony color grade and apply the grade to all three of the clips at the same time. If you have several clips, that could save you some time. So I will disable that, enable the Blackmagic, and all the Blackmagic shots are my close-up shots. And I can add the Blackmagic color correction to all the Blackmagic shots. And once we've applied the color correction to all the clips from that camera, we can now go into our final shot and just start sifting through and seeing, does everything still match up? So the first thing I notice is the iPhone and the Sony shots are fairly bright, but this first Blackmagic shot is quite a bit darker. I did all the close-ups with the Blackmagic, and so I was moving the camera around, so the lighting changed a little bit. So it's pretty easy to go in here, add another color correction node, and we can just brighten this up a little bit. And so what we're looking for here is, do they match up lighting-wise? And I actually think that we can go a little bit brighter still. And of course, you have to understand too, if the light's coming from the side, this is naturally going to be a darker shot. And so it's not all about making them look identical, but making them look like they belong in the sequence. So I think that's good there. I'm probably going to do the same to this one. Brighten it up a little bit. Not too much. This one for sure needs to be brought up a bit. Okay, in this last shot, let's do the same thing. Let's brighten it up a little bit. And then I think I want to go a little green and a little warmer. Okay, I like that. So once you're happy with all the clips and you have them matched fairly well, once the color correction is done, now we can start color grading. This is where it actually starts to tie it in and makes all these clips look like they belong in the same film. So I'm going to add an adjustment layer and I'm going to drag it across all of the clips. So that adjustment layer is sitting on top of every single clip that we have in this sequence. Now I can go back to the color page, and now the color grading node that I'm on is on the adjustment layer, so it's going to affect all of the clips that sit underneath it. So now I can come in here, let's say that I mean, this is crazy, but let's say I darkened it quite a bit. I can go through here and every clip in this sequence, that effect is added to. But I'm not going to do that. Instead, what I'm going to do is just start color grading this like I would for a little scene. And this is where it gets really fun. This is where I like to use Luts, and I've got a ton of LUT packs that you can check out. But let me show you kind of what I do in the color grading process. So I like to start with a LUT. It kind of gets me started on the color grading, and then I can make little tweaks to the adjustment layer to kind of get the exact look that I'm going for. But I find that if you can find a good LUT pack or a particular good LUT that you like, you can drag and drop and it instantly gives you something to work with here. So let me just turn this LUT on and off. It just gives you very quickly a nice starting point for your film. And so this is from my teal orange LUT pack. And I'll say this, I almost never use it at 100% intensity, almost never. So you can go in here to the key tab and change your output. When it says 1, that's 100%. So we can put in, let's say 0.6. Now let me turn that on and off. So now it's more subtle, but we're still getting something. So we've got now our starting point with a LUT. And one thing that I do like to do is, I'll add another node here. What I like to do is sometimes mix and match different LUTs, because some of them do quite different things to the image. There's a few of my kind of go-to that I like. If you like the teal orange look, if you want to see like a lot of the non-skin tones can be pushed towards teal, the skin tones and things like that can be pushed towards orange. There's a lot of really good ones here. Here's a faded one that we could use, and I could drag and drop that, and let's back that off to 50%. And same thing, it's adding just a little bit to it now. So now we're getting closer to what a final product would look like. So I can turn that on and off, both of these LUTs at the same time, and you can kind of see what that's doing. If that's a little bit, too faded for the shot, we can pull the blacks back down a little bit. So there's so much that you can do using LUTs for your color grade. I'm gonna stop there for now. I'll probably play around with some LUTs a little bit later, but for now I'm going to do some additional color grading that doesn't involve the LUTs. I'll keep those applied to give me the starting point, but now let's say that I want all my blacks to be pushed towards kind of a blue color. I can go into my Qualifier tab. So in my new color grading tab, I only want to affect the darks in the image. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave all the colors and all the saturation just as is. But the luminance, I'm going to give myself a bit of a decline, and I'm going to pull the highs back. Now what this is going to do, nothing's happening in the image yet, but what this is doing is this is selecting only the darker parts of the image. Now, if you want to see what you're working with here before starting to add a color grade, if you've got this node selected, you can hit Shift-H. Okay, now this is going to show you only the part of the image that you are working with. So if I pull this all the way to the right, we're working with the whole image. As I start working it left, the highs go first, then you've got sort of the shadows, and then you've got, if you move it further, the blacks. Now nothing in this image is being worked on. So I can pull this down until really only the blacks, maybe that's a little too gradual, make it a little steeper. So now I'm only really looking at the blacks here. And obviously I can pull that up and get more or less, but let's start here for now. It's going to be a gradual slope, so it's not going to be a hard cutoff, which is going to help it look a little more natural. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my wheels here in the offset and just pull it towards a color that I like. I'm going to exaggerate this. I'm going to show you how to back it off, but first I want to pull it far enough to where you can see the color that you're adding. So obviously this is more of a purple. You can go down here and to your blues. You can go way down here to the teals. Let's go and find a nice bluish teal color somewhere in here. When you find a color that you think that you might like, you can hit Shift-H again, and it will reveal the rest of the image that you're not affecting. So right now the blacks are a deep blue, but the whites are completely unaffected, and that's exactly what we're going for. Obviously this is way too much, so again we're going to take our output. This time I'm going to drop it all the way to 0. Because we exaggerated so much, we wanted to see the exact color that we wanted, so we super exaggerated. But now we can drop the output to 0. And we can start to very slowly bring this back up. So right now it's at 15% of max. And if I turn this node on and off, you can see it's still doing something. It's still affecting those blacks in a really cool way. Obviously we can pull that way up if you're going for a more exaggerated look. But I think I liked it down here. Let's look at that. It's not really affecting skin tones. It's not affecting whites at all. It's affecting only the dark things, so the microwave, the stove in the back, the hat, maybe the shirt a little bit. And it's pushing it towards that blue, and it's giving it a really cool look. Of course, you could come in here now with your qualifier and drag it up and get, so maybe you want this gray shirt to to be affected a little more. Now we can drag that up. We're still not getting anything in the skin tones, which is great. The whites are still unaffected, but now the shirt is getting a little bit more. But what you'll also notice is that overall the blue's coming up, so we probably could back this off a little bit more. So let's turn that node on and off and look at that. I'm bringing this all the way down. Now it's just at 10% max, but it's still doing something really cool to the image. Remember, we still have our LUTs. The LUTs are still doing something, but now we're adding a color grade on top of the LUTs and making it a little more unique to whatever look it is that you're going for. And that could be, you can really play around with the color grade and do a lot. But the great thing about what we're doing with the color grading now is that since it's on an adjustment layer on these clips that have already been color corrected to match each other, here's the iPhone, here's the Sony. These clips look identical. They look like they belong in the sequence. Obviously, there's a difference in the depth of field. There's a difference in the quality. But between these two shots, they look the same. Let's go to this final one. Okay. Here's the Blackmagic, and here's the Sony. Okay. So maybe the Sony has a little bit too much color in the skin tones. That's cool to see, because now what we can do is we can go back and actually let's stay in the color tab. Let's pull up our clips and let's find this Sony clip. Okay. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add another node, take my qualifier tool, select the skin tones. I'm going to hit Shift H again so I can see only what I'm working with. Now I can play around with some of the settings here. And I want to have the skin tones selected without selecting too much of anything else. Of course, if your skin tone is the same color as something else in the image, you know, maybe the shadow of the face and the cabinets, if they match in color, there's not much that you can do about it, and there's not much that you want to do about it. What I'm looking for is I want to get as much of my skin tone as possible without getting too much of anything else. So this is pretty good. I know this looks splotchy right now, but for the effect that I'm doing, I'm just going to pull down the saturation in the skin tones. And so when you pull down saturation, if there's a little bit of like pulling different bits of information here, that's okay. If I boosted the saturation, you would get noise. You would start to see some noise in where you did and did not select in the image. But I can now pull this down to, let's pull it down to 40 and start there. I'm going to hit Shift H again to see the whole image. And I'm just going to turn that color correction on and off. So let's look at these two now. With the skin tones pulled down on this Sony shot, now we've got a very nice match between these two shots. These look now like they're filmed with the same camera. Maybe you can see a little bit more than I can, but now when I look at these two shots, they look the same to me, which is exactly what we want. And so if I want to go in now, so let's say that we're happy with the skin tone of this shot, I can take my Sony shot, right click and grab the still. I can go to my gallery, and now instead of my Sony color correction, I've got sort of the whole color grade with it. Now it's showing in this little clip up here, it's going to show you the adjustment layer on top of it. But when I paste this to the individual clips, you're not going to have that issue. So there's two more things that I want to do real quick to the adjustment layer just to make these shots look a little more interesting. So one thing that I like to do is I like to add film grain. And I've got kind of the settings that I know that I like on the film grain. Okay, so something like that. And I'm doing these quickly now because I don't want this video to go even longer. But then one more thing that I like to do is I like to add camera shake. And the reason I like to do this is because I filmed these on a tripod because I was by myself. But if you want them to have sort of the look of a handheld, of handheld footage, you can add camera shake. And if you play around with the settings, it's very possible that this can look artificially, you know, like a shake is added in post, which it is. But if you play around with these settings and learn kind of where to leave them, it's possible that you can make this look a lot more like someone is hand holding this, which is the look I'm going for. I would rather this look handheld than for this to look stationary just on a tripod. And so you can play around with some of these settings like this. With the film grain and the camera shake, it adds something to the footage that makes it just a little more interesting. I want to show you real quick. Now that I've got all the settings where I want them, now we can go in here and play around with some of the LUTs and create some totally different kinds of looks. So I'm going to turn off the first two LUTs that I put on. So we're back to kind of just a pretty basic image. Actually, I'm going to turn back on the first one because I like this as my starting point. But let's just delete the second LUT that I added. So I want to go in here to a couple different LUT packs that I have. Here's my Stranger Things. Hawkins 3, I think, is always a really cool one. So again, I usually don't use them at 100%, but let's keep it pretty high. Let's go to 80%. And so you can see what this is doing too. Let me turn it on and off. So it's giving it a little kind of a vintage feel. Let's go to Hawkins 1. This one's a little stronger. So let's drop this to 5. Now we're getting, you know, maybe kind of a vintage feel to it, which is what I'm going for with the Hawkins. Let's do the upside down. So this is going to be kind of a cool image. Once you have all these other settings on here, you can drag and drop your color grade. And you know that for the most part, all the clips are going to act to it about the same way because of the color correcting that we did on the front end. Let's go, I like the Irishman. Let's throw one of these on here. Whatever you do to one image, it's going to act the same way to all of them because we did the heavy lifting of the color correcting up front. And we can go all the way back here. Here's the iPhone shot. Let's turn all the color grade. So this is the entire adjustment layer. Let's turn it on and off. Okay, here's what we're doing total. And let's go look at, here's the Blackmagic, great. And here's the Sony. And they still look like they match each other. And that's because of what we did on the front part of color correcting to get all these different cameras to match each other. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please like the video, leave a comment. When you do things like that, it really helps this video reach more people and help more people. And speaking of helping people, if you check the show notes below, I've left a link for a free LUT that you can use on any program. Doesn't have to be DaVinci Resolve. Whatever program you use to edit videos, you can use this LUT to help you jumpstart your color grading process and just make your clips and your film look better, quicker. So thanks for watching this video, and I will see you next time.